At 5 in the morning, Evelyn Marsh's $12 million private jet was grounded. Not by weather, not by the pilot, by a pressurization system fault the kind that doesn't announce itself until a cabin wall buckles at 10,000 feet. A $400 million merger was waiting in Tokyo. The departure window could not move, and not one licensed engineer in the entire airport could fix it in under 3 hours. Not one, except for the man at the far end of the corridor, pushing a mop. The man whose name no one had thought to ask in 14 months. The man whose 6-year-old daughter carried a stuffed bear named Biscuit and believed her father could fix anything in the world. She was right. Dominic Hale arrived at Crestfield Aviation before sunrise, the way he always did. The employee entrance badge read D. Hale Facilities, and the guard waved him through without looking up from his phone. The parking lot held a dozen cars at that hour, most of them belonging to overnight security and the fuel crew. Dominic pulled his jacket tighter against the cold Denver air and walked the length of the tarmac-side corridor toward the supply closet at the far end of Hangar 2. He had worked the morning shift here for 14 months. He knew every overhead light that flickered on a timer, every scuff mark on the polished concrete, every plane parked inside by its tail number and registration. He knew, without having to look at any paperwork, that the Gulfstream G650, in Bay 7 registration MM01, belonging to Marsh Meridian Group, had been in for routine service 2 months prior, signed off, and returned. He also knew, because his eyes could not help themselves, that the pressure relief decal on her forward fuselage showed a hairline discoloration he did not like. He told himself it was not his problem anymore and continued down the hall. The mop cart had a wheel that stuck every few rotations, pulling slightly to the left. Dominic corrected it without thinking, the same way he once corrected tolerances in hydraulic line assemblies automatically, with the part of his brain that never fully went off duty. The halogen overheads of Hangar 2 cast a cold yellow light across the floor. Outside the long glass wall, the sky sat gray and flat, the first pale line of dawn still 30 minutes away. He filled the mop bucket, checked the chemical ratio, and started on the corridor tiles. His hands worked, his eyes moved. He had spent 7 years at Defense Aerospace Solutions, a government contracting firm that handled structural certification work for the Department of Defense. His last title was Lead Technical Inspector, Group 7. The clearance level attached to that title meant he had signed off on aircraft systems where a single misread decimal point was not a paperwork error. It was a casket. He was 31 years old now, and he mopped floors for $12.40 an hour, and he was, on most mornings, at peace with that. Most mornings. He checked his phone at 5:20. Ruby was asleep at their neighbor Doris Langley's house, 3 miles east of Crestfield, tucked under the yellow comforter with Biscuit pressed against her chin. Ruby was 6. She had her mother Lauren's nose, and Lauren's habit of frowning in concentration when she ate cereal, studying each spoonful like it might try to escape. Doris would have her ready by 7:30. Dominic needed to be out of here by 7:50 at the absolute latest to pick her up before the morning school run. He did not let himself think past that. Lauren had died 3 years ago, a rain-wet intersection, a driver who ran the light at 45 miles an hour, a Tuesday night in October that split everything Dominic knew into a before and an after. Ruby had been 3. He had been 28. He had handed in his resignation from Defense Aerospace Solutions the following spring, packed what mattered into a 2-bedroom apartment in Denver, and started over in the only way that made sense: small, quiet, and close enough to Ruby that nothing in the world could take him by surprise again. Crestfield paid reliably. The hours were fixed, and nobody asked him anything. The black SUV rolled through the main gate at 5:35, a full hour and 15 minutes before Evelyn Marsh was scheduled to arrive. Dominic noticed it the way he noticed everything, without comment, filing it away. He watched through the corridor glass as the vehicle stopped in the executive parking bay and a woman in a charcoal suit stepped out. She moved with the particular economy of someone who had not wasted a physical gesture in years. Her executive assistant, a younger woman in a navy blazer who was already reading from an iPad before her feet touched the pavement, followed 2 steps behind. Evelyn Marsh was 29 years old and ran a logistics and private aviation holding company that her father had founded, and she had tripled in value in 4 years. She did not move through spaces, she processed them, identifying what was useful and discarding what was not. The corridor, the mop, the man behind it. Discarded. Dominic watched her pass without expression. He was, as far as she was concerned, furniture. He could hear fragments of the exchange between Evelyn and her assistant, a woman named Kara Wells, who spoke quickly and clipped her sentences the way people did when they were afraid of taking too long. Tokyo, 9 a.m. departure. Tanaka Holdings. The merger documents were finalized. The board representation from the Japanese side would be in the room by 11 local time. The deal had been structured over 4 months of transatlantic calls and 2 in-person meetings in San Francisco. If Evelyn was not physically present to sign at the scheduled session, the terms would lapse. The Tanaka side had been explicit. They did not reschedule. And in a Denver office building across town, the company's COO, Jason Kroll, was already at his desk at an hour when most executives were still asleep, which told anyone paying attention exactly how much he wanted this meeting to go wrong. Dominic finished the corridor tile, returned the cart to the supply room, and started on the hangar 2 approach glass. Through the pane, MM01 sat in her bay. White fuselage, the double M tail livery in navy blue, landing gear locked, cabin door sealed. A clean aircraft. A quiet aircraft. He stopped at the section of glass closest to Bay 7. He stood there for 3 seconds longer than the glass required. Then he moved on. Isaac Flynn arrived at 6 to 10 unhurried, methodical, carrying a worn leather document case under his left arm. He was 51, FAA Airworthiness Inspection Division, Denver Field Office. He had a face like a closed ledger and the handshake of a man who had spent his career delivering information that no one wanted to hear. The routine inspection of MM01 had been on his schedule for 3 weeks. He had confirmed it with Crestfield's maintenance coordinator on Monday. There was no reason, at 6 to 10 on a Tuesday morning, for anyone to be nervous. Marcus Webb, Crestfield's head of ground maintenance, met Isaac at the hangar entrance with a clipboard and a mug of coffee. They exchanged the short, flat pleasantries of men who had done this before. Marcus walked him to the aircraft. Isaac set down his case, opened it, and began. He started with the exterior. He worked the way he always worked, left to right, low to high. Nothing skipped. He checked the static ports, the pitot tubes, the fuel cap seals, the leading edge condition on both wings. All clean. He moved into the forward avionics bay. Normal. He checked the emergency exits. Nominal. He opened the pressurization system access panel on the starboard underside of the fuselage and began the pressure differential sequence with a calibrated gauge from his case. He read the first number. He read it again. He did not say anything immediately. He reached back into his case for a secondary instrument, a micro-differential pressure sensor, smaller, more precise, and connected it to the bypass gate housing of the P9 pressurization valve cluster. He watched the readout for 40 seconds. Then he set down the sensor and picked up his pen. He found Marcus Webb near the hangar entrance. They spoke quietly. Marcus's coffee mug stopped moving halfway to his mouth and did not move again for the rest of the conversation. Isaac wrote the grounding notice in precise block letters on his inspection log. Bypass valve fault. Pressurization system P9. Non-compliant with FAR Part 25, Section 841. Aircraft prohibited from flight operations pending repair and re-inspection. He signed it. He dated it. He handed the carbon copy to Marcus. Marcus held it with both hands like it might detonate. Kara knocked on the door of the small conference room where Evelyn had been reviewing the Tokyo documents for the past 40 minutes. She knocked twice, which was the signal for something she could not deliver through a text message. Evelyn looked up. Kara came in and placed the carbon copy on the table without saying anything. She had learned, in 2 years of working for Evelyn Marsh, that some information landed harder if it arrived first in silence. Evelyn read it. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation hum was audible. She did not make a sound for 4 full seconds. Then, "Get Marcus, get our legal team on standby, and find out what we need to get this fixed in the next 2 hours." She paused. "Don't tell Jason." The last sentence was quieter than the others, but it had a different quality, not softer, just more precise, like the edge of something very sharp. Marcus assembled his technical team in the hangar bay within 15 minutes. 2 line maintenance engineers and 1 avionics specialist, all certified, all awake before their coffee had fully worked. They pulled the access panel on the P9 cluster and examined the bypass valve. The problem was real. The primary bypass valve showed uneven wear along the inner gate face, gradual material erosion that had created a microfracture in the pressure sealing surface. Under normal visual inspection at service 2 months ago, it would have been almost invisible. Under Isaac Flynn's differential pressure test, it was a disqualifier. Marcus ran through the options out loud, speaking quickly because speed itself felt like doing something. Option 1. Order a replacement valve from their parts supplier in Colorado Springs. Delivery, if the part was in stock, was a minimum of 90 minutes, and the supplier didn't open until 7. Option 2. Borrow a compatible valve from another aircraft in the hangar. Isaac, standing nearby with his clipboard, answered that one before Marcus finished the sentence. I'm not certifying a flight with an unlogged component transfer. You know that. Option 3. Delay the departure. Marcus did not even say this one out loud. He had heard Kara on the phone in the corridor. He knew what was at stake. There was no option 4, not on paper. The digital clock on the maintenance bay wall read 6:54. Evelyn stood at the edge of the hangar, just outside the technical perimeter, where the maintenance crew had set up their instruments and documentation. Her arms were at her sides, not crossed, not clasped. The posture of someone forcing herself to look calm rather than actually being calm. Kara stood 2 feet to her left, iPad lowered, for once not reading anything. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Jason? She let it ring. It buzzed again. She picked up on the 3rd attempt, because letting it ring a 3rd time would look like panic. I heard there's been a setback with the aircraft. His voice was smooth in the way of people who had rehearsed their concern. If you need me to fly to Tokyo in your place, Evelyn, I want you to know I'm already packed. I have a good relationship with the Tanaka side, and the board would understand given the circumstances. She ended the call. She looked at the aircraft. $12 million of aluminum and engineering, and at this moment it was as useful to her as a piece of furniture. Marcus was on the phone with the Colorado Springs supplier. She watched his face and she did not need to hear the words. His expression said, no stock. The part would have to come from the manufacturer in Ohio. 48 hours minimum. He hung up and turned toward her with the face of a man who has run out of things to try. That was the moment Dominic appeared. He had come down from the upper corridor, not running, not rushing, just walking with the even pace of someone who had decided something and was carrying it through. He stopped at the entrance to the technical bay area, outside the marked yellow perimeter, and waited. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply stood at the edge of the light and waited for someone to notice him. Marcus noticed him first. Can I help you with something? The tone was not unkind. It was the tone of a man who had run out of patience and was distributing what remained in very small portions. I think you're looking at the wrong part of the assembly, Dominic said. He was not loud. He did not perform the statement. He delivered it the way he delivered every technical observation he had ever made plainly, without decoration. The bypass valve wear isn't your primary failure point. There's a thermal deformation issue in the secondary control gate gasket on the P9 housing. You can correct it in place without a component replacement. Marcus stared at him. His gaze moved from Dominic's face to his uniform, the dark blue Crestfield Facilities uniform, the name tag, the mop cart, parked at the corridor entrance 20 feet away. Thank you, Marcus said, in a voice that meant the opposite. Go ahead back to your area. Dominic did not move. It's a known issue on this generation of the G650. FAA published a technical note on it in 2017. The repair procedure uses controlled thermal recalibration and a pressure resequence, no replacement parts required. The whole job takes under an hour, if you have the right instruments. And you have them on that card over there. One of the younger engineers, a man named Perry, who was 26, and had been doing this job for 2 years, turned slightly the involuntary reflex of someone who had just heard something technically specific enough to be interesting. Perry looked at Dominic, then at Marcus, then at the floor. Kara started to say something. Evelyn held up one hand, just slightly, just enough. Kara stopped. Evelyn had looked at Dominic the way she looked at everything in a crisis, not with kindness, not with dismissal, but with the cold calculus of utility. She had been wrong about people before. She had also been right about them in rooms full of people who were louder and more confident and ultimately useless. She was not a woman who confused polish with competence. He had not looked away from her since she turned toward him. "What's the failure mechanism, exactly?" she said. It was not a question with a rising inflection. It was an entrance exam. Dominic took one step forward, just to close the distance enough to speak without raising his voice. The secondary control gate on the P9 cluster uses a high-density rubber composite gasket rated for continuous operating temperatures up to 260 degrees Fahrenheit. On extended ground operations in high-altitude airports, Denver sits at 5,200 feet, which affects thermal cycling. Even on the ground, the gasket deforms asymmetrically over time. It doesn't rupture. It warps. That warping creates a pressure differential at the bypass gate that your primary valve reads as a fault, but the primary valve itself is structurally sound. He paused. You replace the primary valve, and you'll still fail re-inspection, because the read error is upstream. The hangar was quiet. Isaac Flynn had turned from his position near the documentation table. He was listening with his arms at his sides, and his expression, the same closed ledger blankness it always was, which Dominic recognized as the face of a man who was doing math. The correction procedure, Dominic continued, uses a controlled heat application to restore the gasket geometry, followed by a manual pressure resequence at the bypass gate to re-establish the correct differential baseline. The procedure is documented. It was written in 2017. Written by who? Isaac said. His voice was flat and even. By me, Dominic said. My name is on the technical bulletin, FAA document, AMT 2017, G6, Section 9. Isaac looked at him for a long time. Then he uncapped his pen. Evelyn turned to Marcus. Give him access to the bay. Marcus opened his mouth. Give him access, she said again. Same volume, same tone. Final. Dominic moved to the tool cart. He did not rush. Rushing was for people who were uncertain, and he was not uncertain. He scanned the inventory with the practiced sweep of someone who had spent years reading technical layouts in the dark, on military flight lines, in weather that made a hangar look like paradise. He pulled the microthermal calibrator, the differential pressure hand gauge, and the secondary gate toolkit, a specialized socket set that most facilities kept boxed and unused because the procedure it was designed for happened rarely enough that most line technicians had never performed it. Marcus watched him select each instrument and said nothing. Perry watched him and leaned forward 2 inches. Dominic placed the tools on the access platform beneath the fuselage, pulled on nitrile gloves, and opened the P9 cluster panel. He worked from the outside in checking the primary valve first, not because he doubted his assessment, but because documentation required it. He noted the wear pattern, marked it on his handheld log. He had borrowed a maintenance worksheet from the document tray without asking, and moved inward to the secondary gate housing. He found the gasket. The deformation was exactly where he knew it would be, a 4 mm lateral displacement on the trailing edge of the gate seal, invisible to the eye, measurable only with a contact gauge. He measured it. He wrote the number down. 0.4 to 2 millimeters of lateral shift, he said, not to anyone in particular, to the worksheet. Consistent with about 18 months of thermal cycling at this elevation. Perry had drifted to within 6 feet without quite realizing it. He looked at the gauge reading over Dominic's shoulder and said, quietly, "That's what was throwing the differential? The gate can't seal flush when the gasket is displaced that far. The pressure loss at the bypass sensor reads as a valve fault because that's the nearest instrumented point. But the valve itself is fine." The thermal calibration took 11 minutes. Dominic applied measured heat through the calibrator tip in 3-second intervals, reading the contact gauge between each application, walking the gasket back toward its original geometry, 1 fraction of a millimeter at a time. He did not look at the clock. He had learned long ago that watching time while doing precision work was how mistakes happened. When the gasket sat within tolerance displacement, reduced to 0.08 millimeters, inside the allowable envelope, he set up the pressure resequence. The hangar was completely silent now. The two line maintenance engineers had stopped their own work. Marcus had put his phone away. Even Kara had set the iPad on a nearby toolbox and was standing with both hands folded in front of her, watching. Evelyn stood 10 feet back, perfectly still. Dominic connected the differential pressure gauge to the bypass gate sensor port and ran the re-sequence. Pressurize, hold, bleed, repressurize, hold. The needle climbed, steadied, climbed again, and settled. He read the number. He read it again. 0.2 to 9 psi differential at the bypass gate, he said. He disconnected the gauge and wrote the final reading on the worksheet. FAR 25841 allows a maximum of 0.35. You're inside the envelope. He stood up from the access platform, stripped off his gloves, and turned to Isaac Flynn. Isaac was already walking toward him. The FAA inspector took the worksheet from Dominic's hand, read it in full, not quickly, not slowly, but with the thorough attention of a man who understood that his signature on the line below was his professional word, and then looked up. I'll need to run my own differential sequence to confirm. Of course, Dominic said. Isaac ran it. 4 minutes. The needle settled at 0.31. Isaac wrote his certification note in block letters at the bottom of the inspection log. He signed it. He dated it. He initialed the pressure reading and handed the completed document to Evelyn Marsh without ceremony. The aircraft is cleared for flight. Flight crew must monitor cabin pressure every 15 minutes. Divert immediately if differential exceeds 0.4 psi in flight. I want a full valve assembly replacement completed before the next scheduled operation. Understood, Evelyn said. You have a good window, Isaac said. Don't waste it. He picked up his case and walked toward the hangar exit at the same unhurried pace he had arrived with. The grounding notice was void. The paperwork was complete. As far as Isaac Flynn was concerned, his job here was finished. The hangar exhaled. It was not dramatic. There was no applause, no sudden noise, no visible demonstration of relief. It was quieter than that. A collective loosening, like air returning to a room that had been held under pressure. Perry turned back to his workstation. The avionics specialist picked up his coffee. Marcus stood with his arms at his sides and looked at the floor. Dominic set the tools down on the platform in the order they had been used. He removed the access panel cover and resecured the fasteners, 8 of them, torqued to spec, each one checked twice. He peeled the notation label from the worksheet and affixed it to the maintenance log panel inside the access cover before closing it. He looked at the clock on the hangar wall. 8:31. He thought of Ruby. He gathered the borrowed worksheet, folded it neatly, and placed it on the documentation table. He picked up his gloves from the platform. And then he said, to no one in particular because it was not directed at anyone in particular, I need to go. He turned toward the hangar exit. Mr. Hale. The voice was Evelyn's. He stopped, turned back. She was standing exactly where she had stood for the past 40 minutes, same position, same posture. But something in her face was different. Not softer, exactly. More open, like a window that had been unlatched but not yet pushed. Thank you, she said. It was not the polished, automatic thank you of a CEO wrapping up a vendor call. It had weight to it, the kind that comes from a person who does not say it often and means it more for that reason. Dominic looked at her for a moment. Safe flight, he said, and walked out of the hangar. He called Doris from the parking lot. The phone rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He sent a text. On my way, 10 minutes, and drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He was halfway across the Crestfield access road when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Doris. My phone is acting up. Ruby is fine. We're already on our way, she insisted on seeing where you work. Hope that's okay. He exhaled. He turned the car around. They were at the side gate when he arrived. Doris Langley, in her tan coat and sensible shoes, and Ruby in her pink zip-up jacket with the hood that had 2 bare ears on it, holding Biscuit against her chest, with both arms, the way she always held things she was serious about. Ruby saw him before he saw her, because she was always looking, always scanning for him in a crowd the way children do when they are certain someone is coming but can't stand waiting. Daddy! She ran. He crouched down in time to catch her, And for a moment the parking lot, the airport, the morning, all of it receded, and there was just the weight of his daughter's 6-year-old body against his chest, and the faint smell of the grape juice she'd probably had at breakfast, and the scratchy texture of Biscuit's worn left ear against the side of his neck. "I brought Biscuit," Ruby announced into his shoulder. "He wanted to see the airplanes." "Did he?" "He said he's never been to an airport before." She pulled back to look at Dominic with the kind of dead-serious expression that only 6-year-olds can maintain about a stuffed animal's life history. "Is that true? Do bears not go to airports?" "Most bears don't have a good enough reason to," Dominic said. Ruby considered this. "Biscuit's reason is me," she said. "That's a good reason. That's a very good reason." He stood up, keeping one hand on Ruby's shoulder. Doris had arrived a few steps behind. She was 71 with white hair she wore in a bun that was never quite perfectly centered, and she had the relaxed authority of someone who had raised 4 children and survived all of them. "Sorry about the phone," she said. "Thing keeps dropping calls. Is everything all right? You sounded." She stopped, looked at his uniform, at the hangar behind him. "You look like you've been busy." "Little bit," he said. "Did you fix something?" Ruby asked. She looked up at him. Dominic looked down at her. "A little bit. Like the airplanes you used to fix?" She said it with the casual directness of a child repeating something she has heard often enough that it is simply fact, not question. "You told me you used to fix really big airplanes. Was it like that?" The morning light was fully up now, white and clean across the tarmac, catching the windows of the hangars. Somewhere behind him, MM01 was being pushed toward the boarding gate. "Yeah," he said. "Like that." Ruby absorbed this with a satisfied nod and turned to show Biscuit the parked planes visible through the fence. Doris gave Dominic a look that women of a certain age give men who are clearly carrying something they haven't put down yet, not prying, just acknowledging. "You want me to take her to school?" Doris offered. "I've got it," he said. "Thanks, Doris. Really." He heard footsteps behind him, measured, deliberate, not the hurried pace of someone late for a flight. He turned. Evelyn Marsh had come through the side gate without her assistant. No tablet, no document bag, no retinue. She was still in the charcoal suit, but something about the way she was standing, weight slightly shifted, hands at her sides rather than positioned, made her look less like an executive and more like a person. She looked at Ruby first. Ruby looked back at her without any of the social nervousness that most adults perform in front of someone like Evelyn Marsh, because Ruby did not yet know what Evelyn Marsh was, only what she appeared to be. A tall woman with nice shoes who was looking at her with something close to wonder. "Hi," Ruby said. "Hi," Evelyn said. "Do you have an airplane?" "I do." Ruby pointed at MM01, which was visible through the gate fence, ground crew moving around her in the early light. "Is it that one?" "That's the one Daddy fixed." A silence settled between the adults. Not uncomfortable, just full. Evelyn looked at Dominic. "Your daughter?" "Ruby," he said. "She has your eyes." He didn't answer that. Ruby had already turned back to the fence to show Biscuit the aircraft, providing the bear with a running commentary on which planes were biggest and which had the best colors, in the authoritative tone of someone who had just become an expert 10 seconds ago. Doris excused herself with the quiet tact of someone who understood when to become invisible. She moved to a bench near the gate and studied her phone with great concentration. "You have a flight," Dominic said. "Not a question. A reminder." "I have a few minutes." Evelyn looked at him squarely, the way she had looked at him over the maintenance bay measuring, but with something added now that hadn't been there before. "I had my assistant pull your name while I was in the air yesterday." He was still. "Defense Aerospace Solutions. Lead Technical Inspector. The FAA Bulletin in 2017. She paused. The grounding dispute at Holloman in 2019. His jaw tightened slightly, barely visible, but visible. "I'm not asking you to explain it," she said, before he could speak. "I read the public filing. I understand what happened. Someone told you to clear a flight you believed wasn't safe, and you refused, and they removed you instead of grounding the plane." She was quiet for a moment. "I assume the fact that you're mopping floors and not sitting in a certification office somewhere has more to do with that than anything else." "I have a daughter to raise," he said. The words were not defensive. They were complete. They contained everything. Evelyn looked at Ruby, who was currently explaining to Biscuit why the plane with the blue stripe was faster than the one with the red stripe, with a confidence that suggested she had run the numbers. "She told me you fixed the best airplanes," Evelyn said. "She's 6. She said it like a fact, not a compliment." Dominic looked at his daughter for a moment. Something moved across his face, not grief exactly. More like the ache of a door that is always slightly ajar, on something you've decided not to walk through. "The merger," he said. "Did it go through?" "Signed yesterday afternoon, Tokyo time." She studied him. $400 million and a 3-year operational partnership. "It goes through because that aircraft was in the air at 9 a.m. She let that land because of you. I did what anyone with the right background would have done. No one else with the right background was in the building." He had no response to that, so he didn't make one. Evelyn reached into her jacket's inner pocket and produced an envelope sealed, the Marsh Meridian logo embossed on the flap. She held it out. "Emergency technical services fee. It's in the operating budget under unscheduled maintenance. Not a personal gift. Not charity." He looked at the envelope. He did not take it. "You saved my company's most important deal of the year," she said. "Take the envelope, Dominic." It was the first time she had used his first name. He took it. He did not open it. He held it at his side. "There's something else," she said. "And you can tell me it's none of my business," which would be accurate. She measured her words with the same precision she used for everything. "I don't know what happened in 2019. I don't know what it cost you beyond the job title. But I know what I watched in that hangar this morning. And I know that whoever decided you were more useful out of that industry than in it was making a decision that served exactly one person himself." Dominic was quiet. "I'm not offering you a position," she said. "I'm not doing that today, because you've known me for approximately 3 hours, and that would be presumptuous." A corner of her mouth moved the beginning of something wry. "But I am telling you that if you ever decide you want to go back in any capacity, on any terms you choose, I want to be the first call you make." The ground crew had begun the final pre-departure walkthrough on MM01. A Crestfield lineman was waving a flag near the nose. "You're going to miss your slot," he said. "I know." She didn't move immediately. Ruby said Biscuit has never been to an airport before. She says a lot of things. She said it like it was important information. To her it is. Evelyn glanced at Ruby one more time at the small, serious face pressed close to the fence, watching airplanes with the absorbed attention of someone who had decided, in the past 10 minutes, that airports were among the most important places in the world. Then she looked back at Dominic, with an expression that he didn't have a word for and wasn't sure he needed one. "Safe travels," he said. She walked back through the side gate. At the same even pace, she did everything, the gravel crunching under her shoes. At the inner gate, she paused, not long, just a half beat, and then kept walking. He watched until she was through the hangar doors. Ruby materialized at his elbow. Was that the lady from the airplane? Yeah. She had nice shoes. She did. Is she nice? He considered this with the same seriousness he would have given a technical specification. "I think so." Ruby processed that. "Biscuit thinks so too." She held up the bear. He said she had a kind face. "Biscuit's very perceptive." "What's perceptive?" "It means good at noticing things." Ruby looked at the bear and then at Dominic. "You're also perceptive," she said gravely. "You noticed the airplane was broken." He crouched down to her level. "How did you know it was broken?" "Because you fixed it. You only fix things that are broken. That's what fixing is." She said this with the air of someone explaining something so obvious it barely needed saying. Then she held out Biscuit. "He wants to go eat breakfast." "What does Biscuit want for breakfast?" "Waffles." He was very clear. "Then waffles it is." He took her hand. They walked toward the parking lot, his daughter talking to the stuffed bear about whether airports had good waffles. The bear apparently expressing some skepticism, Ruby assuring him that her daddy would find the best waffles no matter where they were, because her daddy could fix anything. The envelope was in his jacket pocket. MM01 lifted off the Crestfield runway at 9:04, 3 minutes behind schedule, which, given the morning, was as close to a miracle as aviation usually allowed. The aircraft climbed through the gray Denver overcast and broke into clean blue sky at 14,000 feet. The cabin pressure held steady. The bypass valve read clean. Kara noted both facts in her flight log and sent a text to Marcus Webb, all nominal. Thank you. She did not know if he would understand what she meant, exactly, but she sent it anyway. Evelyn sat at the forward table with the Tokyo documents arranged in front of her. She had read them enough times that she could have recited the key clauses from memory. She did not open them. She looked out the oval window at the clouds below, white and undisturbed. The same clouds that had been there before any of this happened, indifferent to merger terms and grounding notices, and the particular courage of a man who had decided that mopping floors close to his daughter was a more honest life than fighting systems that didn't want to be fixed. She was not a woman who got sentimental easily. She had built something real from nothing real, 4 years of decisions that were correct more often than they were popular, and that had cost her things she didn't always name. She understood, she thought, a little of what he had decided. Not the way you understand something you've lived, but the way you understand it when you've stood at the edge of a version of it and looked down. She opened the Tokyo documents. She did not close the window in her mind, where she had put the image of a man crouching in a parking lot to catch his daughter. She just set it to the side, in the careful way you set aside things you intend to return to. Across the city, in a Denver office tower with a view of the mountains, Jason Crowell received a forwarded copy of the signed merger certification from the Tanaka Holdings legal team. The email was addressed to the full executive distribution list. The subject line read, Marsh Meridian Tanaka Partnership, executed. Jason read it twice. He set his phone face down on his desk. He looked at the mountains. He picked the phone back up and typed a congratulatory reply. Because that was the kind of man, he was the kind who understood that the performance of gracious defeat was sometimes more important than winning, and that patience was a tool he had not yet stopped using. He pressed send. He did not stop planning. Dominic drove east on the state highway with Ruby in the back seat. Biscuit buckled in beside her with the seatbelt fastened across his plush middle, which was apparently non-negotiable. The morning had turned clear and bright, that particular western sky clarity that came after a cold front, where the mountains to the west looked painted rather than real. Ruby had moved on from the airport topic and was now investigating whether waffles could technically be considered a vegetable if they were made from grain, and whether grain was in the same family as vegetables, and whether Dominic thought Biscuit would be healthier if he ate more vegetables, and whether bears in the wild ate waffles. He answered each question with appropriate gravity. The envelope sat in his jacket pocket on the passenger seat. He had not opened it. He wasn't sure, yet, what he would do with what was inside it. Not just the money, but the offer behind the money. The door she had left unlocked without saying the word open. He was 31. Ruby was 6 and needed waffles, and believed bears had opinions about airports. There was a school run at 8:15, and a shift tomorrow morning at 5, and a bicycle tire that had been slowly losing pressure for 2 weeks that he kept meaning to fix. These were the coordinates of his life, and they were sufficient, and they were his. But he also knew what he had felt when he held the calibration tool and walked the gasket back into tolerance 1 fraction of a millimeter at a time. He knew what it was to do something with his hands that only his hands could do, not because the skill was rare in the world, but because of the 7 years and the 1 catastrophic honest moment, and the 14 months after that, had made it feel like something he had left behind in a place he was not allowed to go back to. Maybe he had been wrong about that. He did not make any decisions on the highway. He ordered waffles at a diner on Colfax that Ruby had chosen because it had a cartoon rooster on the sign, and the rooster looked, according to Ruby, like he understood waffles. The waffles were very good. Biscuit was pleased. After breakfast, walking Ruby to the car, she reached up and took his hand in her small, complete grip and said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to fix airplanes too." He looked down at her. "You do?" "Yes. Because if you fix the airplane, then everybody on it gets to go home." She thought about this. That's important. He helped her into her seat, buckled her in, made sure Biscuit was secured. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, his hands resting on the wheel, looking at the cartoon rooster painted on the diner window. The morning light moved across the glass in the slow way that light moved when you had time to notice it. Everybody on it gets to go home. He started the car. He did not call the number on the Marsh Meridian business card, that Kara had pressed into his hand at the gate, quietly, while Ruby was still talking to the fence. Not today, but he put it in the same pocket as the envelope, and he did not throw it away.